annoyed by this shot yet? Imagine watching a 3-hour film like this. La Vie d'Adèle, which you might know as Blue is a Warm Color, or however it's been translated in the USA, is mediocre at best. It's literally the most overrated film of the year. It won Cannes in 2013, and everything. It was so much acclaimed and cheered on and overall liked. It made critics go, oh! It made audiences go, lesbians! And it made me go, not this again. Okay, conceptually speaking, it's an interesting film, to say the very least. A very professional attempt at a modern and contemporary take on a lesbian love story. Because actually the film itself isn't even about a lesbian love story. It revolves around that central relationship, but it's more about the story of a single girl and her path towards growth and self-realization through change and sorrow, through life, basically. And it happens to go through a discovery of a personal sexuality towards another girl by the name of Emma, whom has blue hair, and we go through that relationship, and then there is a fallout to that relationship, which is a very emotional moment, brought upon by basically the main character, which is called Adele in this film, not being able to accept the stationary moments of her life. Also the fact that the relationship was going to end at some point because there was not that flame of passion anymore that was at the beginning. But yes, this is a film that on one hand it tries to be this story, if you can call it a story, about personal growth and maturation from the adolescent years to adulthood, passing through a difficult relationship that doesn't end well, which is good. It's good, it's unconventional and everything. But on the other half, we have the direction of this film. Now, the name of the director is Abdel Latif Keshish. I'm probably mispronouncing it. And he's a heterosexual male. And it shows. Like I said, this film has this one stationary, insistent, redundant style direction that wants to place the camera 3 inches away from the protagonist's face or other parts of the body, which clashes completely with the idea of change and growth. That's the revolving, overarching theme of the film. A film about change and growth that doesn't change or grows out of its own monochromatic shots. Monochromatic. Basically, I'm trying to say it's very redundant. It lacks color, as in it lacks variety. And the problem is this redundancy of the style, in the long run, ends up completely ruining, or at least very much undermine, the moments in which those close-ups are actually useful to the diegesis, to empower the film. But they don't empower it because every single moment of the film, or at least a huge chunk of it, it's directed like this! And it's very annoying. Not to mention, if the goal of the film was to tell that story and treat the relationship as in part of the growing experience of the protagonist, rather than being a passionate, classic, conventional love story with full of feels and emotions, then the so much debated sex scenes, the very graphic sex scenes, are kind of pointless in that regard. They could have just been heavily cut and nothing would have changed of the experience of the film. It makes me wonder if they're just there to sell tickets. And what's worse is that, again, I told you, this is a film that has a lesbian relationship in it. More than being a film about a lesbian relationship per se, that's directed by a heterosexual male individual. And okay, there is such thing as being curious. The perpetual voyeuristic nature of cinema, observing and watching people in their intimacy, their intimate discoveries about themselves. And then there's the direction of this film that's basically full-on sexual harassment, invasion of private space. You can have the actresses so close to the screen you can practically see the contents of their nostrils. Which tells me, personally, that this director is a bit too curious of an individual, so to speak. And he cannot get over the fact that he wants to film lesbians doing lesbian things, which turns this film from something more honest and sincere of an attempted filmmaking, and more into something sleazier. And the problem is that, judging from some of the dialogues in the film, or even the director blatantly inserting himself from one of the characters in this film in certain key moments of the diegesis, it seems to me that not only is this director being juvenile and childish about the whole lesbian affair, but he's also being very pretentious about it, using arguments and the traditional use of nudity, of female nudity in the history of art, as an excuse to justify his own direction, which again, even not counting the very, let's say, curious eye of the director, it is a mediocre direction to begin with, because it lacks variety, it's redundant, and it's 3 hours of this! There is, it's an intercursing, perpetual, parallel schizophrenia of this film. On one side, it wants to be this modern and contemporary film that talks us about growth and personal maturation, in which the central relationship is not exactly the focus per se, but it's seen more as a part of this protagonist's life as she grows up, a fundamental part of her formation, but it does not revolve around the love story per se, as it revolves more about the protagonist and her own personal experience with said love story, which is something really interesting and contemporary. It goes beyond the stereotypes brought on by Brokeback Mountain. That's basically a conventional, dramatic, forbidden love story with the gimmick of having homosexuality in it. But that's one half of it. But the other half is what ruins this film. The direction, which seems to go the exact opposite of what the story of the film wants to go to. And this baffles me, because it's the same director altogether. And he just wants to film lesbians do lesbian things, not having minimum consideration for their personal spaces, it would seem, and making this whole thing feel very much like a missed opportunity rather than the masterpiece that everyone seems to think it is. Not me. And with that all said about the film, which I didn't really like at the end, it baffles me. It baffles me completely that, as opposed to the original graphic novel here, is surprisingly conventional. Like I said, surprisingly conventional. While the film tries to be anything but conventional, except it ends up being accidentally very conventional because of my mediocre direction, the conventionality of this story is less in its visual presentation, which is fairly interesting, and more in the fact that it is a traditional tragic love story filled with hurt and comfort and angst, teenage angst, and cheesy but emotionally felt dialogues and difficulties, both social and personal, and all the classic good stuff you expect to see in a well-written classic love story. Except this love story is about lesbians. So while the film, ironically, wanted to focus on one of the girls, and the relationship, love relationship, was a passing fundamental experience of her growth, which was undermined by the sex scenes themselves, which would be far better in a film about a true classic love story. This is that classic love story, and the sex scenes in this are, surprisingly, far tamer than in the actual film. Can you believe that? Now, as far as the visual goes, I find it, the world of the main character, which is called Clementine in this film, as opposed to the Adele version, it's called Clementine in this comic, is pictured, as you can see, as pretty grey and colorless. So, when the color blue of the main character, of the other main character hair, is introduced in this equation, what would otherwise be considered a very cold color, again, blue is a cold color, becomes a warm color, because it brings warmth, it brings color, literally color, in this gray world. It leaves an impression, and it becomes the alluring device that makes Clementine discover her sexuality and her attraction for this other woman, Emma. What this book does far more better than the film, because again it was not the film's goal, is making this relationship feel far more interesting, complex, multi-layered, and blooming at its own pace. So on one hand we have Clementine, who is having problems accepting herself, her change, and the fact that that's a change as part of her growth. And on the other hand, we have the character of Emma, which isn't that self-assured, almost perfect example of a partner that was in the film. She was almost not a character at all in the film. She is as complex and multi-layered as she needs to be. Her own conflict is that she loves Clementine as well, but she feels obliged to the other partner that she's already in a relationship with. And then there's also other problems, more social problems that end up playing also a big part in the eventual blooming of the relationship. And it's all about, really, their relationship. It's not really all about one or the other character and their perception of the world as she grows, like it was in the film. This is all about the two main characters themselves finding love at first sight. And by the way, after watching Frozen, love at first sight is, I consider it a load of unnameable. Because, you know, but still, classically structured love story with a tragic finale. And speaking of which, speaking of tragic finale, the way the story is structured itself, it's basically told through a series of flashbacks as we discovered Clementine's thoughts about this whole relationship through the entries in her diary. And her diary is being read by an older Emma after Clementine died in the present time. Yes, this is a tragedy. Clementine dies in this story. I won't tell you how she dies, but it's a well-known fact since the very beginning of the story. So really, all the comic is a flashback to in which we rediscover the relationship, how it blooms and how it fell out, and how things basically went on till the inevitable tragedy at the end. It's a much more classically structured story and narrative, while the film wanted to be an artsy about it, so it didn't really have a classic narrative style whatsoever, which again, it's perfectly fine for this film was supposed to be accomplishing, but again, it fails because of the direction. We already told you why. No need to repeat that, otherwise it becomes redundant. So, yes, there is only one major flaw in this book that really undermines the rest of the story, is that while it takes its beautiful and perfectly paced time to develop and blooms their relationship, then suddenly it flashes forward several years up until they are both like around their 30s, and then suddenly, just like that, there is the betrayal, and there is the fallout, and the abandonment, and the tragedy, and everything goes far too fast after that point. It undermines the story as a whole. So really, my conclusion in the end is that, both the film and the original comic are heavily flawed for their own specific reasons. But if I have to give you a recommendation, the graphic novel is far more interesting and better, because even though it's more classically structured and conventional from a narrative standpoint, it's still far more complete as an emotional and psychological tale about self-discovery and love, and with far more interesting characters than they were portrayed in the film, even though in the film the actresses were pretty good. It's just the director that isn't really particularly good. So yes, my recommendation is go read the graphic novel and stay away from the film, really. It has already far too much attention for my taste. Or, you know what, go watch the film too, but please try, for the love of anything that's sacred, try not to go watch this film for the sex scenes alone. Well, this was me giving you a somewhat quick look at Julie Marot. Le bleu est une couleur chaude. Go read it. It's a satisfying read up until that unfortunate last part, which is far too rushed for its own good. I think you will fall in love with the characters and how they are portrayed. Then again, this makes me think. I believe the intention of the director of the film, other than, those motivations, was to give this story a much more adult spin, which ended up clashing with his own juvenile style of direction, but still, nonetheless, this story, I believe, is more meant for young adult readers. And as far as young adult reads go, this is one of the absolute best. I mean, there's virtually no competition if you think what other things are popular with young adults, but nonetheless, this is a good read. Flaws aside, this is something I would wholly recommend. So go check it out. This has been Madhog. I am currently in Barcelona. I'm enjoying my vacation. I'll be seeing you when I come back. And I hope you enjoyed this very much improvised vlog. I think I'm getting better at it. Or maybe not. Extreme close-up!